One of the main sociologies that we talk about here is Irving Goffman and his theory of the dramaturgical model. And the root word of dramaturgical is drama, and in this case, we mean it more like in theater. So, the dramaturgical model in sociology is basically looking at how it is that we interact with each other as if it were theater. So there are certain key terms that go along with the dramaturgical model. For example, social interaction. Social interaction happens the moment there's two people basically interacting with each other. You're interacting with each other. If you think about it, language is instead of like symbols, or basically, you're walking the street and you just go to someone, or you're a flirt and you go like, we all know what that means. These are social interactions, or you're like, the way the moment you interact with someone else, that is considered a social interaction. So these social interactions are occurring in what we refer to as a social structure. So the social structure is somewhat invisible, but it is a framework that very much governs how it is that we exist. It is the what coordinates us all within that large structure of society. Within the social structure, we have social status. So we all know what status is because we use that word, but it kind of is basically saying how it is that we have this ranking in the social structure. But what's important to notice is that that ranking is created by us. So that's very important to take note of. So if we notice that that ranking is created by us, there's two distinctions to status. One is an achieved status, and the other one is an ascribed status. Achieved status is exactly what the word says. You've achieved something. You are doing your homework right now. You're working really hard to get your degree, and you're going to graduate. And then when you graduate, you'll be employed with something that has to do with that degree, and you'll do really well at it and apply yourself and get a promotion. And as that happens to you, you are achieving the status that comes to you. But the other form of status is an ascribed status, which means it's ascribed at birth. So there are factors or features that are put upon you from birth that you don't have anything to do with it. Were you born into wealth? Suddenly you have a lot of access. Like, were you born into poverty? Suddenly you don't have any access. It's got nothing to do with who you are. It's got to do with what was ascribed upon you. In these factors, we look at race, gender, and class. These are the main attributes that affect you as an ascribed status. So if the dramaturgical model sees us all people as if we're actors, and that life and around us and our interactions is sort of like a play, right? The clothes that you wear, it's almost like a costume. Think about the fact that you put on work clothes, right? Or that's a little bit different from the clothes that you wear to go out, and the clothes that you wear to go to like a party, or some people wear church clothes. Like, that's different from the clothes that you would wear if you're going to sleep, your pajamas. So the idea that we have the different clothes can be seen as different costumes, and then in that sense, the way that we somewhat interact with each other, we can also look at as different stage. So, as far as the stage is concerned, Goffman gives us the term front stage behavior and back stage behavior. So, in front stage behavior, you're in a place where you know you're being watched, and therefore the interaction that you're having with that other person is what's expected of you. And so that you act according to the role that you have in interaction with that other role. And we'll do roles in a second. And then in the backstage behavior, you'd be like, you're not being watched, so you can kind of, quote unquote, be yourself. One of the examples about this is in a restaurant. We call front of the house and back of the house. It's a very good example of front stage and backstage. Front of the house is the host and the waiters, and back of the house are the cooks and the people in the kitchen. And so the way that you act in front of the customers is in the front of the house is really different from the way that you act in the back of the house. Like, in the front of the house, you're like, oh, no, don't worry about that. I'll get that for you right away. Yes. And then you go to the back of the house, you're like, table 5, they're complaining again. I can't stand them. And then you come back down, you're like, here you go, no problem. And sort of like that's what's expected of you in the front of the house. And in the back of the house, that's not expected of you. So you kind of relax a little bit about what it is that would be the norms around that kind of appearance and behavior. We talked a little bit about roles or we talked a little bit about status. So in the status, you have a role. And so that role basically comes into play that moment you have a social interaction. So when you interact with people, each one of you is somewhat defined in this role. Think about this in the sense of like when you, before COVID, and we rode the subway, how many people did you see from the moment you left your house till you got to school, let's say? A lot of people. You don't know anybody's names. So how do you know how to interact with each other? Well, we're interacting with not really with each other, but really with each other's roles in the social structure. So we know how to behave around people when we meet them because we've already gauged not really who they are, but what their role is. So in most of the interactions that we have in the social structure, until we do stuff like getting to know the real you, stuff like that, what we're doing is interacting with each other's roles. And what those roles then happen is that then they're placed in a ranking in the social structure. So you have, each role has a status. And so then that's how it is that we know how to interact with each other without actively really knowing everyone. In our other video, we talked about deviancy, and the important thing about deviancy to also notice is that whatever is considered deviant changes according to time and place, because norms and normative codes are constructed. A social construction of reality means that these norms are different in different parts of the world, sometimes in different neighborhoods, and definitely throughout time. So we have to somewhat notice like these codes that so many people are like, oh, that's wrong. It's like, it's wrong here and it's wrong now. It's not that it's wrong, it's that it's been coded as something that's not accepted. So you have deviancy and deviance, and then you have conformity, which means that when you see that something's a norm, you follow it and you do it. An ideological belief or ideologies is basically that you don't even question it. You just follow it just because you're supposed to. So people who have ideologies and ideological beliefs are usually like following a doctrine of belief without even questioning whether or not it's something that's right or wrong. And so why would you follow them? It's like, well, the other aspect of deviancy, conformity is social control. In social control, we see that the way that society forces people to follow the norms. You're either rewarded for complying or you're punished for not complying. And those rewards and punishments are referred to as sanctions. And sanctions can be negative, a punishment, or positive, which is a reward. And then within that negative and positive sanctions, there's also formal and informal. Formal would be institutional and informal would be personal. Like, for example, formal positive sanction would be that you did really well and you did your homework and you got an A+. Informal positive sanction is that your uncle learned that you did really well on paper and gave you $20. Formal negative sanction would be you didn't do well on your paper and you got an F. Informal negative sanction was you didn't do good on your paper and your mom hit you with the chancleta. That would be informal. And the last term I'd like you to look at is impression management. It's pretty easy to figure out just from the term. Impression management. You manage your impression. Usually you use impression management to gain status in your role. So a good example of this would be a job interview. You wear nice clothes, you make yourself look really good, and you go to that job interview. And then what happens once you're no longer using impression management is like, now you wear whatever, now you got the job and you're like, I'll go in my sweatpants to the job, something like that. So the idea of impression management is that you're trying to gain social status for your role. So you manage the impression that you make of your appearance and your behavior in order to be able to gain role status. Thank you.